the other day on Twitter in response to just the crazy things going on in our country right now with Kyle Rittenhouse and the school shooting in Michigan. You know, it really made me think about an old friend of mine who truly changed my life, and I mentioned him on Twitter. His name was Dr. Mohammed. So it takes me back to Iraq in 2003. My unit, the 6th 101st Aviation, made our way up through Iraq to Mosul. And then I was asked to jump from the Mosul airport down to this little Air Force base called Kayara West, and had been a large Air Force base for the Iraqi military, especially during the Iran-Iraq War. When I arrived, the defense line was gone. There was an infantry unit of the 101st Airborne, but they were just getting settled, and we didn't have much security. So I placed some of my pilots, their pistols, as our gate. Shortly after arriving, as we settled in one day, an Iraqi gentleman, older gentleman, and a young boy showed up at our gate with a note in sort of broken English, and it said, to the Americans, we need water and we need the bullets to stop shooting at our village. And it was signed by Sheikh Mohammed. And luckily, one of my pilots had been an Arabic interpreter in his previous life in the Army. And we wrote a note back, and they asked us to meet. And so I went to my higher headquarters and asked for permission to go and meet the locals, which is another story. I got permission. So we made contact with this gentleman, and I met this guy, probably his mid-30s, and it turned out he was a medical doctor, trained at Mosul University, and spoke what he used to say was a medical English, and his name was Dr. Mohammed. And what had happened was, as the Americans settled in, the villages that ringed our base had come together to talk and decided as a group, the sheiks of the villages, the mayors, if you will, the heads of the clans, asked Dr. Muhammad to approach us as the one who spoke English, and his village was one of the closest to our base. And this began a very long and very special relationship for me. Muhammad became sort of my partner as what would eventually lead to building schools and building roads and delivering water across the region for all those villages. We actually especially built a clinic for Dr. Muhammad. He had not been able to practice medicine, and that area didn't have a clinic. And he, actually my colleague said, hey, we should build a clinic. So we did. We built him a 3-room clinic right in his village. And it was really, really important. It ended up kind of propelling me into, probably where you guys know me. I started a little campaign with my friends back in Peachtree City, Georgia, which picked up some momentum on the media to supply that clinic specifically. And that ended up, man, gosh, we had supplies. We ended up doing this thing called Operation Fred that would get over 4,000 pounds of supplies shipped to our little village in Iraq. And it was very special. Led to a lot of media opportunities, led to me being on TV. General Petraeus deciding that I was good at TV and becoming his official spokesman. So it's really a train that came out of that little village of Jadala Sufla. But what was really special about the relationship was the time I spent with Dr. Muhammad, many, many hours, meeting with other villages or sitting with him just talking. And I learned so much about the Iraqi people and the culture and what they'd been through for 35 years under Saddam Hussein. And it really gave me perspective on who we are as Americans and what freedom means. And that was the story I told on Twitter as I look at what's happening to our country. And I do remember very, very clearly the day we were sitting in his village in what he called his meeting room, which most of the villages had like an open room where they would meet and eat together. And it's generally an empty room with pads around the side of the room, cushions, and you would sit on the floor, and they would bring platters of food in and eat your hands or whatever and talk. And I remember sitting with Dr. Muhammad many times and learning the lessons. And one of the ones I really stuck out There's really two I'll tell. The first one was, I remember when we first started getting some bombs exploding in our area, and many were right on the main highway and often in broad daylight. And I said to Mohammed, I said, I don't understand how, people who are driving by can see the terrorist or whomever planting these bombs and not say something, not see them and report them. And he said to me, you have to understand something, Major Wellman. He goes, for 35 years under Saddam Hussein, you survived in Iraq by not seeing things. You survived by not seeing when the car pulled up in the middle of the night and took the family from next door away in the middle of the night and disappeared them. You did not see someone coming home with torture marks on their body. And that's how you survived. And it really was eye-opening for me to understand what it's like living underneath an autocratic government. And the one I mentioned this the other day, a second really key lesson that still to this day comes back to me often. And that was a discussion of what is freedom. As freedom comes up a lot right now in our country, right? As we talk about masks and COVID vaccines and guns and birth control and abortion and the choice movement, everyone brings up their freedom. And I said to Dr. Mohammed, I said, we were talking about freedom in the United States, and he said to me, he says, you have to understand something, Major Wellman, for you in America, freedom means being able to choose, where you live and where you work and who you see. But freedom in Iraq, after all these decades of Saddam Hussein, means you stole my sheep, I get my gun and I kill you. I am free to kill you. And in a country awash with guns, that really was what we saw. And I remember being somewhat shocked, I think, by it, as I realized the very difficult task we had ahead of us to help Iraq recover from being under autocratic rule all those years and to realize a freedom and a democracy much like ours. And what's the story then? And I learned a lot. But the story is, I left, came back a couple more times, saw Dr. Mohammed many times. 2006, they planted a bomb underneath the road to his village and blew up his car as he drove by. He lost both his legs. Back to the first time I met General Odierno, or interacted with him, when the Americans tried to remove him from the hospital in Tikrit, I pulled some strings and got Dr. Mohammed put back in the hospital so he'd recover more. And General Odierno didn't like the idea of a lieutenant colonel back at the Pentagon meddling in his sector. It was a very pointed email that I got. 2012, when we left, not 3 or 4 months after the Americans pulled out of Key West Air Base the first time in 2012, Al-Qaeda terrorists stormed the village, grabbed Dr. Mohammed in the clinic I had built for him and executed him with AK-47s. I think about that often. I think about Mohammed. I think about his impact on me and the impact he had in that region as he worked to make it a better place. But I also think about how he died at the end of a barrel of a gun. So a lot of people ask me, why do I do what I do? Why do I fight so hard and so loudly for the things I believe in, even as they've hurt my business and they've hurt my personal life, and I've gotten death threats and threats against my family? Is because this matters, because our freedom matters. And I learned that sitting in a mud brick building in the dirt on a cushion, talk to a Arab sheik who's just trying to make his world better. And that's what drives me. I'll probably tell more stories about Dr. Mohammed. He was a remarkable man who changed my life. So I appreciate you. Thank you for everything. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving.